I have that whakatauki, 3 fights a day.
What?
Yeah, it's Auntie Juanita's whakatauki. Yeah, I'll only engage in 3 fights a day.
No Mai Hara Mai Ki Kapitu of the Cousins, Episode 7.
What do I want in a man? We're in our Auntie Juanita's house today. Yay! Good Auntie.
Kia ora.
Thank you for having us.
Right, I'm so excited for this episode because our Auntie Juanita Hepi is such an amazing person. You're an actress, a writer, a director, a teacher, a scholar, a mama, you're our auntie, most importantly. No. But we just know that you mean so much to so many people, and so it's a real privilege to have us in, your space, really. Is there anything that we missed out? Did I miss out? I feel like I missed out heaps of things.
No, I don't think so. It doesn't really matter. We don't want to centre me.
Yeah, because today we're actually talking about Tāne Māori. For this particular episode and this kōrero, our question is, what do I want in a man? Looking at that question a bit deeper, it's not just what do I want in a boyfriend or a partner, it's also, Auntie, you're raising sons and we have lots of relationships with Tāne Māori around us, and it's interrogating what is it that we actually want our relationships with Tāne Māori and for the Tāne Māori around us to look like and to be like.
But also it's the connotations attached to that question, eh? What are my positive experiences with Tāne Māori? And if I am raising sons, how do I want them to be in the world? How is it that they can be strong in their identity and also be a part of rebalancing some of the off-balance stuff that's happening in our world today, particularly when it comes to wahine Māori and kōrero Māori. We have this thing with deficit theorising where we're consistently looking at some of the worst statistics for our people in our community, and so we also don't want to do that with our tāne because they are also caught in the contradictions of a colonised reality.
Especially because, none of us in this conversation are Tāne Māori, but we are faced by the effects of those relationships. We don't live in a little bubble where we're completely separate, we're intertwined and really weave together. And it's an important relationship.
Yeah.
I'm going to pour some tea.
Oh, thank you.
Yay.
I have a pātai for you, Auntie.
Ai, hea
You
tō
spoke a
whātai.
little bit about raising tamariki, and you have 2 cousins, your 2 sons, as well as Lexi, of course. And I was just wondering, when you're thinking about the kind of tāne that you want them to grow into, do you have any kind of role models in your mind of Tāne Māori that you're like, that would be the taumata that I hope that they reach?
I mean, I always go back to Moana Jackson as the person outside of my community, outside of my whānau that has always inspired me, but is also, is Moana even human? Because the qualities that Moana Jackson has, there's something to do with storytelling. Moana always told stories, so my dad is an amazing storyteller. That's a quality of his that I really, really love. Moana was super intelligent, highly intelligent, and I see that in some of our ngaitahu leaders. Yes, that would be the ultimate, but that's a very huge, big place to get to, right?
We've had a lot of discussions outside of this.
Yeah.
Recorded conversations about how we feel about Tāne, if we feel supported by Tāne, and yesterday actually our producer Rue and Jade and I were just talking about how some of our favourite moments, and at least one of my favourite moments when I was growing up was being a kid and playing video games with my boy cousins.
Oh my gosh, I remember you used to do that because you were like a little anime girl as well.
Aww.
And so you would have all these weird toys and stuff.
Weird toys? What weird toys?
No, anime figurines and things like that.
Gosh. Yeah, because I was a little nerd. But it was interesting because I felt like some of the most joyful moments I had when I was growing up was with my male cousins.
Yeah, me too.
Because they're just so fun and chill, and you play games together and you have little wrestles together. And even when I was growing up, I think because we would have so much fun together, I always like felt like I was a little boy on the inside. And at times I still feel that energy, but I don't know. I don't know if it's weird that I associate like having fun and a good time with like being a boy or hanging out with boys, because everything was always so like laxed.
Yeah, and this is going to sound stink, but I do all these classes with wahine Māori, and there's that moment for most wahine where you're like, oh, I want to hang out with the boys because they're more fun.
Yeah.
I don't want to hang out with the girls because they're always this or they're always that, and it's not a fun place to be. But we have to interrogate that as well, because it is something to do with patriarchy and it is something to do with misogyny. And yeah, the most powerful spaces for me, the places that value me the most, are wahine Māori spaces. And when I was growing up, my uncles generally were the ones who went out and worked, and the wahine were the ones at home, so they were raising us.
Often it was just felt like the boys were having the good
better time. Yeah.
I feel like that was so not my experience.
Really?
As well, growing up. I don't know. I just thought that the boys were like,
The boys around you
wanna hang out
were
with-
stink,
yeah, that was smelly.
Oh man, Carl.
Nah. Oh my gosh, but I just remember Toa always used to bring up the story of her taking me to Hatu Opani Park. And I was playing, and there was a boy from my school there, and I don't think I remembered him, but we were kind of just playing, and then he like put his hand on me. And I turned around and I like punched him in the gut.
Oh my God, you bully.
But
In the gut?
And Toa was like, oh, no. And then Toa was like, why did you do that? And I was like, I didn't tell him he could touch me. And his mum was like, kia ora.
Amazing.
yeah,
Amazing.
that's right.
So you actually sound like your Toa. That's something Mum would say. Like if they're in your face, just punch them in the gut. Because Mum is quite staunch.
And I spent a lot of time with Toa growing up, and I feel like that was in my head. I was like, don't do something I don't like.
But I mean, just going back a little bit, I think that's a really good point to make, is that our experiences wahine Māori or tāne Māori are so very different as well.
Yeah.
So when we talk about this type of stuff, we're really talking from our personal perspectives. It's all good to have joy and lightness and laughter, but to have more of that, there are some yucky things that we need to talk about. We have to talk about some of these kind of uncomfortable relationships that we have with tāne, like internalised sexism, internalised racism, misogyny, those sorts of things. Those big, ugly words, which I don't like saying because they sound yucky when you say them, But you can't talk about that or attempt to make change if we don't kind of look the thing in the eye. You can't put a plaster on somebody who's had a heart attack. You need to get to the source of the problem and really fix it. And so we need to do that, which is why this conversation is difficult, because we're not tāne. And so when we're talking about tāne Māori, there'll be a lot of disagreement and a lot of challenge, and how we move through that. It sounds a little bit cliche, but that is the important thing. And, if you've been to a rūnaka hui, and everyone is having their say, but people don't get stopped. They don't stop having their say at the hui because people disagree with them. That this is going to be a space where people are going to disagree. So it's good that you've brought that up, Jade, and talking to your own experience, which is quite different to mine and Kura's.
Yeah, how are you feeling about the tāne Māori in your life at the moment, Auntie?
You like how I took a drink at the time you asked me that question? I have really mixed feelings. On the one hand, I feel the most loved by the tāne in my whānau. And on the other hand, I feel the most oppressed by them as well.
Did you say depressed or
Oppressed.
Ah.
Yeah, not really oppressed, because nobody can do that to me. I feel a lot of aroha and pouri for our tāne Māori in my family as well. Especially because you fellas would know that the report for the abuse in state care, that report came out recently. And those stories are horrific. They're tragic, they're violent, they're volatile, and this is tāne Māori, majority tāne Māori and tāne Pasifika. And so when you think about the impacts of those things, there's definitely a sense of mamae there for me as well, because our tāne also need some healing around these things. So yeah, there's a lot of context to think about when I think about the tāne Māori in my family. But I know that not everybody goes around doing that. But sometimes when I have been, particularly my little brother, we get into these really intense states of dislike with each other. That is such a nice way of saying it pisses me off. But I often will remind myself that my brother has had some really stink experiences in the world as well, because he is Māori, but also because he is Pākehā, so he's that, that half-caste child, right? I do have empathy for the tāne Māori in my life. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, mixed emotions around these tāne.
I didn't actually read through the whole report. I read through like a policy summary of some of the content in it. I remember reading it and I was at mahi and just feeling a lot of emotions. I think being in university and higher education and feeling somewhat so clued up about a lot of the atrocities that have been experienced by our people. And then it almost felt like another slap in the face, because I was just like, this too? Because that impacts the whole whānau.
One of the biggest things that colonisation did to our people was to disjoint the whānau unit, which is like, that's at the heart of who we are as a people. So once you, separate those two things out forcibly, you see the impacts of that still today. And you're right, Jade, like you're talking about these layers of harm. It does. Sometimes it feels like it's too much, right? Because you've learned this terrible tragedy, and then there's another one and another one and another one and another one, and then you look globally and it's happening globally as well. So the layers of harm are immense and intense. The intergenerational harm that has occurred because of colonisation, breaking down that whānau unit, you see everywhere. Particularly today, with that kind of riri that I've been feeling, this kind of wee wawa inside my body around the current government. And I don't want to get entirely political, but yeah, there's a sense of fear about it, which I've never really felt before. And it's because of how it's going to impact whānau Māori again.
Yeah.
It feels like you get to a place and then they move the goal line or something like that,
It's interesting because I think we've started from quite a hardcore place, which is from harm. It's only now that I'm older that I have more tāne Māori as mates rather than just from my whānau. Hearing tāne Māori talk about their struggles with not having safe places to share their feelings or to speak to things that have happened to them, or just to even just be honest about anything that they find they have genuine feelings on. Which is it was a shock to me, because in my family, at least on my dad's side, like all the men are very open and like will cry if they feel upset and will share their feelings. And when they're struggling, they'll come home to talk about it. And even my koko, one time he was talking about how he doesn't cry, but he said to me, I wish that I could. And it wasn't because he was like repressing it, it's just because that just wasn't the type of guy he was. It's just, different people have different bodies and different ways of processing. And his was not crying, but he just said, man, that looks so good. It looks so awesome. I'd love to have a little cry. And I thought that's so beautiful, hearing someone who is literally born in the 1930s, who's like lived through the effects of World War II and has watched so much in his lifetime, just be like, wish I could have a tangi.
Yeah.
And I go, I'll have one for you, koko.
I mean, your koko is one of those humans as well who is just such a beautiful person you just want to bask in koko's energy and his abstract way of thinking, and there's something super grounded about that, eh? For some of us it is about creating a secure space for other people, but yeah, that sense of groundedness. I'm quite a rangi person, I'm quite hyperactive, so maybe that's why I value it.
I've just noticed in certain spaces where I've been quite nervous. And in a lot of the spaces in my life, it's very mana wahine. I'm thinking of this particular time where our tuahiwi haihana had come in to help tautoko us on the day, and he just brought such a beautiful, calm, toe vibe. I just noticed I felt so good, and then we spoke about it a little bit after, and we were all just like so thankful to have him there to tautoko us. And I think part of that is just him being so strong within himself, within his kaitahutaka, ngaitua hururitaka, being there in the capacity where it wasn't like an ego, or it didn't feel like an ego thing. He was really just there to be supported, which I think is what makes it particularly special, because that isn't always the case. And I don't want to get into the deficit stuff, because I am guilty of that, of immediately going into that space or that whakaaro and passing it off as like being critically thinking about things. But it's actually, you don't get the aspiration and the vision when you're in that space. You're just in the, like, what do you actually get from looking in that space?
There is a beautiful Hawaiian scholar called Pokala Inui who talks about these 5 stages of decolonisation, and one of them is actually mourning and grief. So you have to go through that. You have to acknowledge these terrible histories, but you have to also move through that towards dreaming, commitment and action. If we don't do the grieving, we can't do the dreaming. If we don't do the dreaming, we can't do the action.
Love what you've put down.
Thanks, JD.
It's a beautiful kōrero. But I guess just in terms of us, like, I don't know, I just thought that it sounded a little bit funny that it's like, what are our dreams for Tāne Māori, but we don't have Tāne Māori here to talk to.
Yeah.
But
That's why it's a dream.
oh my God.
And then I woke up.
Because it does impact us, right? Like, that's why we want to be like, but
we don't separate ourselves out as well.
Yeah.
When we talk about ourselves as Māori, we talk about ourselves as this big group, hey? It's mahapu, maiwi, mawhānau, it's really just you. So what are our dreams for Tāne Māori? Well, it's the same dreams I have for wahine Māori. It's the same dreams I have for tangata Māori. It's the same dreams I have for whenua Māori, moana. It's the same dream. Thriving, healthy, but being able to have a cup of tea, a kōrero, a kai, telling our stories. So the dreams we have for Tāne Māori are the same dreams I have for all of us. You know, I want our tāne to be healthy and thriving. I want them to remember that pre-European days, we were in sex-positive communities. We were polyamorous, and some of us were just hooked up with the one person forever. We were all multiple ways. We were looking after our, tāne spent a lot of time looking after our babies and teaching them how to fish and teaching them how to collect kōnini berries and these sorts of things. So I hope that helps a little bit with the disconnecting everything, because there's a real harm in that as well, which Paulo Freire terms single narratives, but which are when you have one side of a story,
Yeah.
We just don't do that in Te Ao Māori, but it's really hard to speak about this stuff in English as well, because when we say discomfort, it means it's uncomfortable, and it's usually got a negative connotation. But discomfort can also just be when you're trying to get your tongue around pronunciation of Te Reo Māori. That's discomfort. But when you get it, there's a liberation and a freedom in there as well.
I love that you, when talking about the pre-colonial state, you mentioned so many different aspects of it as well, because I feel like sometimes within the narratives in the pūrākau, it's very like warrior based. All of our conquest.
All throughout our arts processes, our toi Māori, you'll see this balancing of ira tāne and ira wahine. And then you see these changes along the way. So even the way we tell our stories about our wahine and our tāne atua, and because a lot of them were written down by those early European ethnographers and anthropologists, and so we lost a lot of our wahine Māori atua because these stories were suddenly about male atua, but also something resembling Christ or godliness, of male superiority. And so, yeah, you see these things changing along the way. I think it's really good because a lot of our solutions are already there. It's just how do they manifest today? What do they look like today? And how do they do that? We have to do that together. As much as we are having these kōrero about Tāne Māori should be having kōrero about wahine Māori.
Do you think that we are at a place where we're ready to have those wānaka together? Because I guess wahine voices are not going to be as loudly heard at the table, because I think that is still an issue, very alive and...
It's
Wow.
definitely an issue. I mean, I experience it in my own mahi. I've had racist emails from people and I'm constantly having to pass a particular role over to a Tāne Māori, even though I know he's probably not the best person for that role, but he may have status or more power, or maybe his whakapapa is considered better. So yeah, my own experience is definitely that. It's still really difficult to be a wahine Māori in spaces. But I also want to say, I don't get bogged down by that, right? I just move on to the next kaupapa sometimes, because I have that whakatauki, 3 fights a day.
What?
Yeah, it's Auntie Juanita's whakatauki. Yeah, I'll only engage in 3 fights a day. When I told you that?
No.
Yeah.
Only 3 fights a day.
Yeah.
Can 3 fights, can it be like, do you mean 3 different fights, or can it be like one extended fight that you keep going back to throughout the day?
Oh, nobody's ever got that deep after the laughter of the statement.
Never interrogated your
No.
whakatauki.
But because really it's kind of like, it's a witty saying, right? It's to remind myself that I cannot fight every fight. It's a reminder to myself that I need to conserve my own energy. And it's a reminder that these things don't define who I am, right? If I can choose to enter the conversation, it's probably not that important to my well-being right here, right now. But knowing when to feed energy into particular kaupapa, that's important. Some of those far-right far-right sort of things that are online at the moment, I'm not going to engage with them at all.
Yeah.
There's a certain point where you go, actually, it doesn't matter what I say here. Something radical is going to have to happen. And am I ready to fight that fight? Nah, because I really just want to make sure that my Pākehā colleagues are saying our Māori colleagues' name properly. I mean, that will make a difference right here, right now. So, yeah, being really specific.
I want to go back to your question, Jade, about are we ready to have that conversation? And in some ways, I think a lot of the work that has been done by just so many people, particularly wahine, there will never be a day where everyone will be ready, and that's why the mahi has to be done. Maybe my answer is no, but it doesn't matter. We show up regardless.
If you go back to our story about Papatūānuku, that was the first violation by a Tāne Māori, We don't really have that conversation because we don't want to, because, again, it talks about some of this yucky, painful stuff. But it's good to clock it. That's why our tipuna told us these stories. They're ways of being in the world.
Even the stuff that, there are certain stories about our tipuna that I'm like, man, if I did that, I wouldn't want that to be remembered. But we do, because it's the truth.
Yes.
And the truth is more important than, just our feelings of wanting to protect ourselves and be the man all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think it's such a beautiful to start talking about this. And because honestly, the whole kaupapa of this episode, I think, is just like, I just want to be able to be real with Tāne and to have real conversations.
Today, Tāne Māori still hold power. That is true. They still hold power in places like governance, and even though wahine Māori are everywhere, there is this kind of invisible, let's give the power to Tāne Māori. This is from my experience as well, being in leadership spaces, even though they're full of wahine Māori doing the work. And Tāne Māori will often be the voice that is listened to in a space, but also, we do have to talk about, or we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of violence that goes on in our homes as well. And Tāne Māori need to be able to talk about that as well. But I think that for Tāne Māori, that one thing that they do need to know is that they are really loved. And I don't know if they feel that when they look at Wahine Māori, because we're so like, get in the bloody kitchen and do the dishes or whatever. So that sort of thing. But we love our tāne, we love our boys, and there is a sense of value in that. We know that we can do the thing, but as Moana Jackson says, incrementalism breeds stasis. So if we do things a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, eventually nothing happens. We need action now. We need to make changes now. We need to look at ourselves differently, our whānau differently, our communities differently. That includes the people that don't look and sound like us as well.
This has just been such an amazing kōrero, and it's interesting that it's anchored on this question of what do I want in a man, because it's kind of like, yeah, there's that question, but actually the question kind of sucks and it's so boring like just in comparison to everything that we've actually spoken about, which is so much more. And I really, really love what you say, that what I want for our tāne Māori is exactly the same as what I want for everyone else.
Yeah.
To thrive.
To thrive, be happy. Yeah, to not get shitty when we get shitty. Like it's okay.
To text me back.
Yeah, well, that one's a bit more personal. Sorry.
Nā New Zealand On Air I tautoko.
Made with the support of New Zealand On Air.